What if the key to unlocking true genius wasn't just raw intellect, or endless memorization? What if it was a profoundly different way of seeing the world? We've all hit walls with rote learning, right? It feels like banging your head against a wall sometimes. But what if the secret to truly mastering complex ideas lies not really in words, but in how we literally picture them? Today, we're doing a deep dive into the extraordinary mind of Albert Einstein. Not just as the father of relativity, though obviously that's huge, but as our guide to a unique cognitive style. Our mission is to explore his incredible reliance on visual-spatial reasoning, that vivid mental imagery he used, and connect it all to this fascinating concept called visual learnography.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about. We're going to define visual learnography properly. We'll uncover its neuroscientific basis to what we call the optic science of the brain. Basically, how your brain is naturally wired to learn visually. And then, the really exciting part, reveal how you can leverage these powerful insights for much more effective learning, potentially transforming how you process and, really internalize knowledge.
Okay, let's start right with Einstein himself. He famously said something like, "I rarely think in words. A thought comes, and I may try to express it in words afterwards." Isn't that wild?
It really is, especially considering the complexity of his work.
Right. His groundbreaking theories, the very fabric of how we understand the universe, they didn't start as language. They emerged from something much more visual, more spatial. Think about those famous thought experiments he did.
Oh yeah, writing the beam of light.
Exactly. Or
Yeah.
visualizing space-time warping like a fabric. These weren't just like clever analogies he made up later to explain things.
No, absolutely not. They were fundamental to this process.
They were his actual method of conceptualization, his mental blueprints for these huge abstract concepts. It gives us a direct window into how his mind actually worked.
That's spot on. These visual strategies were, in a way, his superpower. They allowed him to visualize incredibly complex theoretical problems without needing any physical equipment. No lab setup for some of this stuff.
Just his mind.
Just his mind. He could grasp complex relativistic geometry by mapping it out internally and represent gravity not as some, abstract force described by equations alone, but as the visual deformation of space-time. You could almost see it. This was his high-functioning visual cognitive system working overtime, running these incredible simulations in his head.
Like an IMAX movie in his head, constantly experimenting. Okay, so if this is how Einstein's brain operated, this visual powerhouse, what exactly is this visual learnography we're talking about? How is it different from just, drawing a quick diagram for notes?
That's a great question, because it is deeper than just illustration. Visual learnography, fundamentally, is a neuroscience-based model. It describes how the brain comprehends information, internalizes it, and then reproduces knowledge, primarily using its visual-spatial system.
Okay, visual-spatial system.
Right. It's how your brain naturally integrates what you see, where things are located in space, what you imagine, and even your physical actions, like manipulating objects, to understand something new. So it's driven by optic inputs, what your eyes take in, but also powerfully by mental imagery, by forming spatial memories. And this really stands in contrast to a lot of traditional education, which is often very verbal or rote-based.
Just memorizing facts and definitions.
Exactly. Visual learnography prioritizes image-based understanding. It's almost like manipulating mental objects in your mind. You're creating these rich mental models of space-time process as you learn. It's thinking in pictures and relationships, not just decorating words with a drawing.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a different way of processing entirely. So let's unpack the brain side of this a bit more. Where does this incredible visual processing, this learnography, actually happen? Where is the optic science taking place inside our heads?
Right, so the foundation lies deep within your brain's visual architecture. Think of it like a really sophisticated processing network. First, you've got the occipital lobe, usually at the back of the brain. That's where raw visual data from your eyes first lands, like the input terminal.
Okay, step one.
Then the parietal lobe kicks in. This is crucial. Think of it as your brain's internal GPS and 3D modeling software. It helps you understand spatial relationships, where things are, how they move, how to interact with them.
So location and interactions.
Precisely. And there's a specific pathway, the dorsal visual pathway, often called the WARE pathway. It's really key for navigating objects through space, tracking motion. And then, absolutely critically, there's the hippocampus.
Ah, memory center, right.
Memory, yes, but it does more. It's like the brain's master architect here. It integrates all these visual and spatial inputs with memory, and it helps create these dynamic spatial knowledge structures. These things we're calling brain pages.
Brain pages.
Yeah.
We'll definitely need to talk more about those.
We will. And you also have structures like the thalamus acting like gatekeepers, managing the flow of sensory info, focusing attention, making sure the system runs smoothly. But what's truly fascinating, connecting this back to Einstein,
Yeah.
post-mortem analysis of his brain, decades later, revealed something pretty amazing. He had extraordinary development in his inferior parietal lobules.
The parietal lobe area you just
Exactly. A specific part of it known to be critical for spatial reasoning, visual imagery, numerical thinking, mathematical thought. So this anatomical difference strongly suggests that his unique visual thinking style wasn't just a preference. It was quite literally built into the architecture of his brain. The hardware supported the software, so to speak.
Wow. Okay, so the physical evidence backs up the anecdotes in his own descriptions. Now, this is where it gets really interesting for all of us listening, this idea of brain pages. You said the hippocampus helps create them. If Einstein was doing this intuitively, how do our brains build these brain pages? And how does visual learnography make them, I guess, better or deeper?
Right. So in the visual learnography model, knowledge isn't stored like text on a flat page or just a list of facts. It's stored and activated as these brain page maps and modules. Imagine your brain doesn't just store the word democracy, but builds a kind of dynamic mental space around it, with interconnected visual elements representing concepts like voting, representation, debate, maybe even historical timelines visualized spatially.
So less like a dictionary definition, more like a mental simulation or concept map.
Exactly, almost like a 3D mental environment you can navigate and explore.
Yeah.
Each concept is a sort of visual module within that space. And visual learnography is incredibly effective at helping us build these high-definition brain pages because it taps into what the brain naturally does best.
Which
Things like pattern recognition. Our brains are prediction machines. Also detecting color and motion, understanding visual sequences, creating 3D models mentally and rotating them, and even mapping abstract symbols like numbers or mathematical operators directly onto visual or spatial ideas. Think of a number line as a spatial concept.
Okay, so it aligns with the brain's natural processing strengths.
Precisely. Unlike just trying to memorize words, which can be quite superficial sometimes, visual learnography directly engages your brain's sensorimotor pathways. That's the link between what you see or imagine and related physical actions or sensations.
Ah, so it's more embodied.
In a way, yes. It allows learners to visualize and mentally reconstruct knowledge using what we call object language. Think about understanding how an engine works. Object language means you can see the pistons moving, the crankshaft turning, the spark plug firing in your mind's eye.
Without needing the words reciprocating motion or internal combustion?
You might know the words, but the understanding comes from the visual-spatial simulation, the object language first. And that leads to much, much deeper comprehension and far better long-term retention than just memorizing the labels.
That makes intuitive sense. If you can visualize it, you feel like you truly understand it. Okay, so this is all fascinating about Einstein and the brain science. But what does it mean for you, listening right now? How can we take these incredible insights from a certified genius and actually apply them to our own learning? Whether we're students, professionals, or just curious folks trying to get our heads around complex stuff.
Yeah, this is the practical payoff. We can absolutely learn like Einstein, even if we aren't Einstein. It's about adopting the strategies. We can reimagine how we approach learning by consciously bringing in these visual dimensions. First, think about visual spatial transfer design. This means actively using and creating visual representations. Don't just look at a diagram. Try to build a mental model you can interact with. Use concept maps, flowcharts, maybe even simple simulations or sketches.
Make it active, not passive.
Exactly. Use visual storytelling. So instead of just memorizing the steps of, say, photosynthesis, visualize the sunlight hitting the leaf, the chlorophyll capturing it, the conversion process happening like a little movie in your mind.
Okay, that's one. What else?
Second, consciously develop brain page learning modules. Create your own modular visual content. Actively draw, map out connections, visualize knowledge structures. Try to use that object language we talked about. Don't just illustrate the words. Represent the relationships, the dynamics, the structure visually, on paper, on a whiteboard, or just in your head.
So be the architect of your own brain pages.
You got it. Third, engage in specific visual learnography training. This means practice. Practice mentally simulating processes, predicting outcomes, exploring systems, all without relying only on words. Create your own Einstein-style mental labs. Pick a concept and just play with it visually in your mind. Rotate it, zoom in, see how the parts interact.
Mental tinkering.
Mental tinkering, exactly. Fourth, and this is maybe more for parents or educators, Focus on optic engagement in early childhood. Start early. Use puzzles, building blocks, spatial games, anything that gets kids interacting with objects and using their eyes to guide their hands. This stimulates those optic circuits early on.
Builds that foundation.
Yes. And finally, actively work to replace rote with visual recall. Use image-based memory strategies. The method of loci, the memory palace technique, is a classic example. Or creating vivid visual mnemonics. The goal is a fundamental shift, moving from primarily remembering words to visualizing concepts and their connections.
That's a powerful list. And it feels achievable. It's not magic, it's technique.
Absolutely. And these methods aren't just for geniuses or visual learners. They enhance understanding, boost creative problem solving. They lead to higher order thinking and much better knowledge retention for all kinds of learners. It taps into a universal capability of the brain.
It really makes you wonder what else this kind of understanding could unlock down the road. What are some of the bigger implications, maybe in research or technology? Where is this field of visual intelligence heading?
Oh, it's a really exciting time for this field. The study of Einstein's brain was just one data point, but it opened up so many questions. Researchers are now exploring if visual learning assessments could actually predict intellectual potential, maybe even better than traditional IQ tests in some domains.
Interesting.
They're digging deep into the role of visual-spatial memory in creativity, especially in STEM fields, but also in the arts. There's also really promising work looking at how visual brain page theory might lead to new strategies for helping individuals with certain learning disabilities.
Wow, that could be huge.
It could. And then, of course, there's technology. Think about AI and VR, virtual reality, augmented reality. These technologies have immense potential to amplify human visual learnography. Imagine immersive learning environments where you can literally walk through complex data or build molecular models with your hands.
Accelerated learning through amplified visuals.
Exactly. It could completely change education and training. And ultimately, this all points to a critical societal implication. That fusion of imagination and visual cognition. It's not just nice to have, it seems absolutely essential for the kind of scientific discovery, technological innovation, and creative expression we need in the 21st century.
So wrapping this up, the core message seems incredibly clear. Einstein's very visual, very optic brain shows us that this way of thinking isn't just a learning aid or some kind of neat trick. It looks more like a fundamental architecture of deep learning, deep understanding, and maybe even genius cognition itself.
I think that's right. And perhaps a final thought for everyone listening. To learn like Einstein isn't necessarily about having his IQ. It's about daring to see beyond the page, to visualize the invisible, to construct the unknown in your mind and make the abstract tangible right there in the theater of your own mind.
That's a powerful image. So the call to action for you listening is this. Challenge yourself. Next time you're tackling something complex, don't just rely on reading or listening passively. Consciously practice learning through drawing, through mapping concepts out, through imagining them vividly. Build your own brain pages. Use that mental visualization, that object-based rehearsal we talked about.
That's it. Build it. Understand it.
By embracing these visual dimensions of your own intelligence, you can absolutely unlock hidden potential. The visual brain isn't a luxury add-on. It seems to be foundational for deep learning, creativity, and those breakthrough moments of understanding. It's time to join the revolution in learning. See it, build it, become it.